In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate a sample Python program and then explain what each of these lines within the program mean or imply. So in other words, here's a sample program that I've already opened within my Python idle. And on the right side, it's just a Word document explaining, for instance, what line 0 means. So just note here that the numbers on the right are not part of the program file. They're added for reference purposes. And by numbers, I mean these numbers that you see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to 39. These are just for reference purposes. So I've added them just so that I can explain that what line 7 means, what line 8 means, for instance, or what line number 25 means, for instance. Okay, so these are just for reference purposes. When you're actually creating a program in Python, you don't need these numbers. So I've placed them myself just so that I can explain the Python program line by line. Okay, so let's start. Line 0 here, for instance, the first line within our program starts with a number sign. So anytime a line that starts with a number sign, this implies that this is a comment by the coder. Okay, so Python ignores this line, and this does not form part of the actual program, although it's listed or it's written in the program. But Python ignores this. As soon as it recognizes it starts with a number sign, it knows it's a comment. So in other words, Python is not going to do anything to this particular line. So comments are useful because it helps the coder or the programmer to actually know sections of the code. Sometimes your software or your program may be very, very long, so these are helpful. So line 0 is technically not part of the program. It is just there to tell the operating system what version of Python to choose. Since, here's a word of caution, the older Python 2 version is incompatible with the newer Python 3 version. And the reason why, because the syntax is different. So if you write a program using the Python 3.5, which is the current version, for instance, it may not work if you use it as a Python 2 or within a Python 2 environment. So we will mostly run programs from inside the idle programming environment, as I mentioned earlier, where this line is not really required. And to run just by clicking on the program in the operating system window. However, the line is important if your computer has Python 2. So just to tell or to identify which version you're using. And you can place anything in the comments section as well. So line 4 or 1 through 4, this is a multi-line text enclosed in triple quotes. So every time you see these triple quotes, for example, and anything in between these triple quotes, this simply implies it's a multi-line text. Coded text is called a string. A string at the very beginning of a program, like this is documentation for the file. Okay, so these are just strings and is highlighted in green color. So every time you see anything in green when you're coding in Python or using Python language, that means it's a string, and string means text. Lines 5, 21, 29, 37, in other words, every time you see a blank line between the code here, so it'll be line number 5, for instance, and line number 21, line number 29, and so on. So blank lines are included for human readability to separate logical parts. The computer ignores the blank lines as well. So Python is going to ignore line 21, line 5, and these are just entered to break or to make it look simpler. Just like when you're writing a document, right? You're writing an essay, for example, and you enter a new paragraph or you enter a line to separate your logical concepts. So blank lines are inserted in Python as well. Line number 6 is the story format equals and then the triple quotes. So the equal sign, every time you see an equal sign in Python, this tells the computer that this is an assignment statement. So what essentially is happening here that the computer will now associate the value of the expression between the triple quotes as a multi-string line with the name on the left, which is the story format. So here you're assigning this entire text, so to speak, to the story format. So if I were to, let's say, just say story format, which actually would mean all of this text. Okay. Lines 7 through 20. So lines 7 through 20, which is the body part of the story format here, contain the body of the string and the ending triple quotes. This story format string contains some special symbols, making it a format string, unlike the string in lines 1 through 4. The story format string will be used later to provide a format into which substitutes are made. For example, notice within the story format here, you see something like braces and then animal. And then as it says, this animal like to eat food, and food is also in braces. Similarly, animal, food, city is also in braces, and so on. So the parts of the string enclosed in braces are places a substitute string will be inserted later. So this is essentially going to prompt, let's say, a user enter the name of an animal, enter the name of food, enter the name of the city at a later point in time. So this substituted string will come from a custom dictionary, which will contain the user's definition of these words. So these names of animals, food, and city is going to come from a custom dictionary that we'll create later. And the words in the braces, as I mentioned earlier, like animal, food, and city, indicate that animal, food, and city are words within that particular dictionary. And this custom dictionary will be created in the program and contain the user's definition of these words. So these user's definitions will be substituted later in the format string within the curly braces. Okay, so this is between lines 6 and line 17. Next is line 22, which is definition, tell story, and then a set of parentheses. The def is short for definition. This line is the heading of a definition which makes the name tell story becomes defined as a short way to refer to the sequence of statements that started indented on line 23 and continue through line 28. So again, this definition tell story is simply from line 23 to 28, and it's just a sequence of statements that make part of this definition called tell story. The equal sign in line 23, once again, every time you see an equal, it's an assignment statement, right? So the equal sign in line 23 simply tells the computer that this is another assignment statement, and the computer will now associate the name user picks with a new empty dictionary created by the Python code called DICT and a set of parentheses. And as we move along, once we start creating programs, once we practice with this, you will get to remember these Python codes, the functions, the built-in words, the reserved words, and so on. But for right now, line 23, which says user picks equals DICT parentheses, is simply creating an empty directory created by the Python code. And line 24, 25, and 26, where it says add pick animal, food, and city, is just the sequence of instructions defined in subsequent lines for adding another definition to the dictionary based on the user input. So the results of these 3 lines is to add definitions for each of the 3 words, animal, food, and city, to the dictionary. Line 27, story equals story format dot format user picks, is simply assigning the name story to a string formed by substituting into story format using definitions from the dictionary called user picks to give the users a customized story. Okay, so for right now, just understand that every time there's an equal sign, there's an assignment, for instance, and there are certain built-in Python code and the concept of a little bit on dictionary. You can add a sequence of instructions. So let's scroll down here and bring up the rest of our code. So line 30 is a line where it's simply a heading of a definition, which gives the name add pick as a short way to refer to the sequence of statements indented on lines 34 and 36. So once again, line 30 is simply def add pick q, comma, dictionary. The name add pick is followed by two words in parentheses, q and dictionary, and these two words are simply associated with an actual keyword, and dictionary given within the definition is invoked in lines 24 and 26 above. Right here, when the user is prompted to enter a name for animal, food, and city, this is in fact where it's going to use. And line 34 is the plus sign here is used to concatenate parts of the string, so to join two strings together. For example, you may have first name, last name, and then you want to display them together instead of in two different columns, for instance, or two different separators, for instance. You'd actually join two words, so we use concatenation. So the plus sign, anytime you see a plus sign within the Python code, it simply is joining two things together. And line 35, which is the response equals input prompt. The right hand side of this equal sign causes an interaction with the user to input text from the keyboard. So every time you see this prompt, in parentheses, right? Input means it's going to require input from the user, and prompt means the cursor is going to start blinking, right? It's going to wait until the user enters something. So the prompt essentially is just asking the user to do something, and that's in line 34. So the prompt string is printed on the computer screen, and the computer waits for the user to enter a line of text. And that line of text then becomes a string inside the program. This string is assigned to the name response. Okay. So again, every time there's an equal sign, it's an assignment statement, right? Line 36 is dictionary q equals response. The left-hand side of the equal sign is a reference to the definition of the keyword in the dictionary. The whole line ends up making a definition of the current Q, where it becomes a response typed by the user. And finally, we have a couple more left, line 38 and 39. And line 38 is tell story parentheses. The definition of tell story above does not make the computer do anything besides remember only what the instruction tell story means. It is only in this line with the name tell story followed by parentheses that the whole sequence of remembered instructions are actually carried out. And finally, in line 39 is input press enter to end the program, and this line is only here to accommodate running the program in Windows by double-clicking on its file icon. Without this line, the story would be displayed and then the program would end. So you want this to make sure that you as a user ends the program. So this line forces the program to continue being displayed until there's another response from the user. And meanwhile, the user may look at the output from tell story. So a few important things that we took a look at within a sample program, for instance, the prompt, the equal sign, the three quotations, and our comment code. Okay, so just to give you an idea of what a sample program looks like, and a line-by-line explanation of each of these areas. And there are many other functions and codes and variables that we'll take a look at and we'll work with. So not to worry, this is just so that you can get a gist of what some of these areas within the Python program looks like. So as we move forward and start creating our own programs, this will be helpful. So practice, take a look, and let's move to our next lesson.